Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to this session titled Mobility as a Service, or MaaS. Today, we will have a conversation with practitioners on the benefits and barriers of expanding mobility as a service. I am Sophie Lambin, CEO of Kite Insights, a research and communication agency, and I will be your moderator today. For this discussion, I will be talking with partners from MaaS and representatives from different mobility solutions. Welcome, everyone. Ironically, this discussion is taking place where many of us have been forced to stay at home. But as you will hear from our speakers, the work on the future of mobility has not paused. In fact, there has been a great deal of work in shaping the way we will move around, particularly in cities. To the audience, I'll invite you to put your question in the chat, and we will make sure that our speakers take them up throughout our conversation over the next hour. So first, a bit of context to give you a sense of the scale of the opportunity. Over the past decade, to improve our ability to get around, almost $200 billion has been invested globally in mobility technology. $33 billion was invested just in the last year alone. This technology takes different forms. It's self-driving cars, ride-hailing apps, electrified vehicles, and even urban air mobility and drones. Mobility as a service is part of this ecosystem of technologies. It's also the technology that brings other solutions together in an interconnected and accessible way. On one hand, it promises to make mobility cleaner, cheaper, and more accessible. It can also make transport system more efficient and give people information to make better decisions about how to travel, about how much carbon their journey emits, for example. But the growth of MaaS also raises important questions. Where are the business opportunities for the rollout of MaaS platforms? What new business models are needed to work with existing public transport system? How can new entrants to the market make money in an environment where many fails to make a profit? How can the opportunity this mobility creates be given to all, not just those who live in certain areas? Our panelists will have a lot to say about the commercial and sustainability potential of these new platforms. So I would like to welcome our speakers, starting with Verushka Beckart from Cao Cao Mobility.
Bonjour.
Louis Burns, a partner from MaaS in the UK.
Hello.
Grégory Derouet, a partner from MaaS based in France.
Hello, everyone.
Christia Hutala-Jenks of MaaS Global.
Hi, everybody.
And last but not least, Jeremy Rice, a partner from MaaS based in Chicago.
Hello, everyone.
Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. So I will start with an opening question to all of you who want to respond. First of all, from your perspective, what would you say is the most exciting thing that you would pick up about MaaS today? And what, from your point of view, should users get excited about? Maybe, Louis, I'll start with you, and then I'll go through the other speakers. But if you could maybe start by bringing us your perspective on that question.
Sure, okay, thanks, Sophie. So I think what's particularly exciting about MaaS is that we have a situation where both individuals' needs and society's needs in terms of transport and how we get around are changing, and they're changing quickly. And for me, the exciting thing with MaaS is that it is the key that can potentially unlock that puzzle as to how do we satisfy those different requirements. If we take just one part of that, if an individual is looking for a particularly low carbon method of traveling around, MaaS has the potential to give them that solution. And for me, I think that's what's really exciting about this particular subject.
Great, thank you, Louis. I'll quickly go around everyone, then I'll go back to all of you. Verushka, can I bring your perspective on that question?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Louis was saying. It's basically offering an opportunity for the user to use different type of mobility in one different application. So I think it's all about convenience, and we see that today time is getting short. We have less and less time. So if we can have a solution that provides us with all the different mobility, then in that case, it's very helpful.
And Verushka, I was wondering, for the benefit of our audience, if you could say a quick introduction of Cao Cao Mobility.
Yes, of course, yes. Cao Cao Mobility is actually a mobility company. We've got a ride-hailing or chauffeur service based in Paris at the moment. Our main investor is actually the group Geely, which is automotive constructor in China. Cao Cao Mobility actually exists in China in 57 different cities. It's above 2 million users per day in China, and in Paris we launched the service in January 2020. And what we have is that we have two different offers. We have a range which is called Elegance, which is the TX that you all know for people who have been traveling to the UK under the name of Black Cab. And this second offer is a more generic offer. The key difference is that we've got three different values: environment, quality, and security. And all our offer is based on the environmental offer and responsible offer. So what I mean by that, in short, is that all the minimum kind of vehicle that we have is hybrid with gasoline. We don't have any other type of vehicle. So it's either a hybrid with a rechargeable, or otherwise it's electric, or a hybrid gasoline.
Great. Thank you, Verushka. Gregory, maybe I come to you now with my original question. What is the most exciting about MaaS today, and what should users, in your view, get excited about?
Thank you, Sophie. One thing which is exciting for me is to see the way how industry companies are taking into account this MaaS stakes and environment, meaning how I am an industry, how do I move to services, which is not my key business model. This is a way to change without changing, in fact, because if I am an automotive company, for instance, I need to keep my foundations, but I need to build a new room. So what kind of new room I need to build to be a player in this environment? And in other way, if I'm not an automotive company, maybe I have a room of new opportunity. So how can I move to that to be a player in this new mobility as a service sector? So for me, this is one of the most exciting things, to see how people and how companies are taking into account that and move in this world.
Thanks, Gregory. Krista, if I go to you, and maybe if you could start by a quick introduction of MaaS Global, and then answer that first question.
Yeah, sure thing. I've actually been working on mobility as a service already for a decade, even if I'm clearly very, very young. I have already a fair bit of experience in it, but funnily enough, the reason for being excited about it hasn't changed. Even when I was, as a civil servant in the Finnish government, working on the policy and regulatory side of things, and now working at MaaS Global, which is the world's first MaaS operator, it's exactly the same thing. It's actually enforced the excitement. And so at MaaS Global, where we are concentrating on bringing you monthly subscriptions. So all of your mobility needs covered in one monthly subscription. And we're currently live in a handful of different cities in Europe, and also quite recently launched in Japan. It's amazing to get to work on something completely new, developing a new kind of consumer service and consumer market from ground up, and at the same time doing that with where your business model is also your sustainability strategy. Your sustainability is your business model, and so it really comes everything from the basics of where mobility as a service really comes from, is that mobility or transport is the second largest expenditure in any household. This is nearly universal, especially in the Western countries. And at the same time, transport is one of the biggest emitters of emissions. And it's actually, unfortunately, that transport emissions keep on growing. We're the only industry that has growing emission levels. And with MaaS, what you try and do, you take the existing piece of the puzzle, the existing supply, you use it more efficiently, whilst you have the built-in model, especially the business model that we work on, in pushing people more and more towards the greener choices. So walking, cycling, public transport. And simply put, why so? Because they are also the cheapest kilometers. So what makes sense for the environment actually also makes business sense. And this is what keeps me going, being very excited about MaaS.
Well, your excitement is palpable, and I love that, you know, when your business model is also your sustainability strategy. I think it's a very nice articulation of it. Thank you, Krista. Jeremy.
Sure. I think I would speak as a person who lives in the city from a consumer perspective. One of the things that excites me about MaaS is the ability to have the same convenience of personal car ownership at a much cheaper cost. And that's something that, you know, 5 or 10 years ago I wouldn't have thought possible, but we're certainly seeing that here in Chicago. You know, eliminating some of the maintenance and the other hassles that come with the vehicles, but still being able to get where I need when I need to get there. And so that's very exciting to me.
Now, Jeremy, maybe if I continue with you with a question that I would then ask the others as well. I mean, from a user perspective, why do users choose MaaS? Do they see those benefits as you have articulated them in terms of greater sustainability, cost effectiveness? Is this something that has translated from a user perspective?
Absolutely. I think certainly from the younger generations, those that are used to using their cell phones and their apps, you know, they're seeing these services pop online that allow them to get where they need to go within the city without having to worry about where am I going to park my car, or how am I going to pay for that parking ticket I just received. So we're certainly seeing a shift, but more so for the younger generation than the older.
Maybe Verushka, from your point of view, you know, bringing that user perspective, what is your observation on how users, you know, choose MaaS, and do you observe generational differences that Jeremy was pointing to? What are your observations as to what are the drivers of usage?
Yeah, I think I agree regarding the youngest generation, but I believe also that decisions that are being made also by governments, or also by the fact that we are having a different context at the moment with the COVID, is making shift people and are much more aware of the different usage. And we can see already that there is a shift in the usage with more and more, as Krista was saying, about walking and cycling, individual mode of traveling. So yeah, there's a difference of, I mean, the younger generation is much more aware of the environmental part and also selecting and using the MaaS, and because yes, they are very much aware of the apps that they are using and traveling that way. But I do believe that other generations are progressively changing and trying to find other solutions also. And that's where the MaaS is coming into play. And that's where we can actually provide solutions for them to make it easier to travel from point A to point B, all different mode of transport included.
So what would be, Gregory and then Krista, it'd be interesting, what would be sort of other usage, you know, beyond transportation in the way you can inform decision making for as people making decision about not only just the mode of transportation, but maybe the route they might be taking to go from A to B. Gregory, do you want to maybe talk from a user perspective?
You propose Krista and Gregory, so maybe ladies first.
Krista then.
Yeah, sure. I think that this is, unfortunately for you, Gregory, this is a topic I can talk forever. I think that that's also one of the fine things that with MaaS, you have so many different pieces of the puzzle that you can play with, but then you also bring in service design and you bring out app design and different data elements. So there's actually a lot of different kind of levers that you can play with. Certainly what we can see with our customers is that first and foremost, they're very much driven by convenience. I think that that's the first kind of thing that you need to promise them, that you bring them convenience instead of something else. But then you have a multitude of different triggers. We're basically slightly different in our user segments, the likes that we have. And I can say that there's a growing number of people that are, for example, driven by sustainability, but it also has to be convenient at the same time. And now, certainly with MaaS, and for example, like it's the likes of WIM, so the service that we provide people, is that there's a multitude of different things that we can then kind of nudge you in different directions. It's giving you the guarantee, it's giving you the information of what's the availability of different type of choices, whether it's the actual transport service choices, or whether it's giving you accurate information how long it takes you to go somewhere. But certainly what we can see is that there's one crucial thing, that there has to be access. You need to be able to also provide people access, so that through that one click, they can also get that ticket to the transport, public transport. They can actually pay for that taxi trip. If you only give them information of what's out there, that's not enough. They also need to be able to book a ticket, book a seat, for example. And beyond this, it's also about providing people a guarantee so that they can trust that it's really out there, and they can get it as conveniently as the car that normally sits outside just for you. And for this, for example, we have already started testing of making monthly subscriptions on purely an SLA. So giving you a service level promise. It's not about promising you access to public transport or taxis. It's a promise that wherever you need to go, we will get you there.
Interesting. Krista, can you give an example of kinds of related service that is particularly exciting, that maybe is less what you would expect from MaaS?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch you properly. Can you repeat that?
Example maybe of a kind of service that would come out from a user perspective, that would come out from using MaaS, that is maybe the less within the expected realm of the expected services. An example that.
So one of the things that we've already started piloting quite recently, but then unfortunately COVID put bit spanners on, is indeed this service level type of thinking. So it's, for example, we give you a promise that within 15 minutes, you give us where you need to go, and we will give you the best option. And then we will factor in, for example, where is it exactly that you're going? What is the weather like? So it might be that if it's lovely weather, we will provide you a shared bike. But if it happens to be raining cats and dogs, we will provide you a taxi ride. And then I think another really good example that what we are now piloting, early stages, but piloting, is what we also call living as a service. So this is something that we're doing in particular with our partner in Japan. So combining actually your living, so your rent, your accommodation, together with all your mobility needs. And how that once again starts nudging and pushing people of thinking about their biggest household expenditures altogether, and whether there needs to be any ownership.
Just Gregory, with that sort of question from a user perspective, what do you think users choose MaaS, and what are the key drivers of usage in your view?
Yes, first of all, I think what point is important is that to say that users are the key people now, meaning that for all the environment, maybe we are in an open technology wide side, we are in a new world. In fact, the main point is to say, what do you want as user? And for the company, if I take the example of the company, it is important to try to catch what wants the user. And in fact, the users want a lot of different things. And sometimes, in fact, it's not a question of what do I want, but who I am. And it's more a question finally of identity. If I take the example of the car, before my car, the type of my car was part of my identity. And now it's more my identity. This is the way I use my car, and maybe I do not have a car, but it is the way I use the services of mobility and how I use the car of other people, I say. So what I think is really important, it's in fact, yes, the user is a large part of is really the main point of the system. And in addition to government and regulation, in fact, the users are really the ones who move the market and who drive the market. So for the company is to say, how can I catch the needs of the users? And the users are more in a more philosophic than I would say consumer part of things, because who I am as a user, as a consumer, using such services or buying a car or something like that. So for me, this is really key. I do not have the answers of that. If I would have the answers of how can I use that, the identity of user, I would be maybe I don't know, rich maybe. But I think for me, it's really the exciting things to see how can I catch the user need, and maybe not only the need, but the identity of the user. And I think it's really one of the things, and what's very, very, very exciting.
If I may add something?
Yes, please.
Yes,
please,
sorry, just to react on some of what was said. I think there are 4 different types of approach to the service and to the MaaS service. One of them is when you are a user, you are looking for either the optimal time, so you want it to be as short as possible. Okay. The other one is the best value, what costs you the less. The other one is the best service. It doesn't mean that it has to be optimal time. You just want the best service. You want to go to point A to point B in the service and that goes back to what Gregory was saying about identity. What is the service that is relevant to me? And then the last one, which I think will increase, is the low carbon emission. I'm quite sure that this one will be crucial. People will be looking for that progressively more and more. And also the fact that, yes, it is coming from the user, but at the same time, that's where the legislation and also all of that is coming into play, is that we need to provide also what is needed in infrastructure to be able to provide that to the user. Because it is a coming trend, but at the same time, it's also driven also by the legislation, I believe.
Interesting. So optimum time, best value, best service, which is very much linked to the priority of the user, and then carbon consideration. I think it's an interesting categorization. Thank you for that, Verushka. Louis, if I come to you then with that question, and maybe it'd be great to maybe bring in your answer some examples of what you have seen happening in certain cities as well in terms of application of MaaS.
Sure. So taking cities, it is really interesting because you can see that the rules of how you travel around cities are changing, and are changing quickly. So I think about what's happened with some of the cities in the UK. We've had a real decrease in the amount of parking that's available. We've actually had almost like penalties for parking coming into play. Companies having to pay quite a lot to have just a small number of parking spaces. So that's one key change. We're seeing more and more sort of zero and low emission areas coming in, particularly in city centres. And you can guarantee it won't be long before actually private vehicle access to city centres will just be banned. It's where the legislation's going. And I think that's an interesting point, because we've talked a bit earlier about the early adopters for MaaS and the younger generation naturally being people who will adopt quicker, but actually where it's regulatory change forcing this through, then everyone has to adopt and everyone has to change. So that will take away to a degree that generational aspect. So how are we actually seeing that play out in the cities, and what am I seeing in UK cities? Well, like I say, actually private vehicle access into cities reducing, both from a cost point of view and actually just from being allowed to go in. So much more use of trains and bus to get in, certainly that last 1 or 2 miles. But there's a further journey in that. There's actually, you've got to get to the start of that bus journey or get to the start of that train journey. So this is where MaaS really comes into play. We're seeing people having to piece together a journey, which previously just was the one car that they owned on their driveway, straight to the parking space under their office. Now it may be, I don't know, a walk to the train station and the train into the city centre, or it's it's hailing a cab to get to the train station and get that journey in, and then walking across. But having to piece together a journey that's got several different aspects to it. So I think, yeah, particularly where cities are involved, that's really the changes that we're starting to see come through, which should be enforced through. Yeah, we have early adopters with the younger generation, but actually everyone's having to make these changes. And MaaS is the key to letting people and helping people to actually do that.
So, I mean, for example, as a user, I can say in any travel plan you schedule, for me, I want to be able to do X number of steps, and you know, you could also include a health consideration, I suppose, in the way a journey is being planned, which is really quite interesting. I mean, in terms of concrete example of cities that you think have done that well, and you know, Jeremy, when we were preparing for this conversation, you also bring some interesting point about urbanization trend in the US, and how do we deal with urban and suburban consumers. So I want to bring you in that conversation, but can we point to Kristia, Verushka, maybe as practitioners, you know, which are the cities that are doing that well, would you say? Where should we look for best practice these days?
I think that there's a couple different ones. For example, Antwerp is very, very close to my heart because of their kind of very all-encompassing approach to MaaS overall. I think that they're kind of setting some of the boundaries and the framework because they want to adhere and ensure that the policy goals are reached. But at the same time, what they're really trying to do is to leverage and harness kind of the innovative powers of getting as many players coming in to the city. And I think that this was also even to the point that Verushka was making about the different drivers or the different things that we need to hit for the different customers. I fully agree with her. But one of the things that we need to also remember is that we're not only for example, the very cost-driven customer all the time. We're not only the customer who's driven by convenience, or we're not only driven by, for example, how quickly we can get there. It's all very kind of place and contextual. Normally, I always take the greenest option there, but then when I really need to get quickly as possible to a doctor with my kid, then I'll jump into a taxi. And that's one of the things that we need to ensure, and that's also one of the beauties of MaaS, that you create that flexibility in options, and that needs to apply in the cities as well, because essentially you have so many different customer segments out there, and you have so many different needs also from societal perspective. So it's not an easy thing. It's definitely not an easy thing from a political perspective as well, and acceptance, to only restrict people and restrict their access. And so even if we have some tough decisions to make, for example, the vehicle usage, etc., at the same time, we should put policies and regulations in place that make sure that there's viable options and viable alternatives to as many as possible. And that's where MaaS has a very, very important part to play.
Great,
and
thank you.
I say Antwerp's doing a fantastic job for that.
Sorry, who?
Antwerp in Belgium.
Antwerp, yeah. It's very close to my heart as well as a Belgian. I'm glad you mentioned that. So Jeremy, I can bring that question then to you. When we were preparing this panel, you were talking about the sort of tension between urban and suburban consumers. Can you bring some perspective in the US, how this is playing out?
Sure. So in the US, you know, over the last really 200 years, year by year, the US is becoming more urban. And I think along with that it goes along with the economy of the US is becoming more of a service-based economy as opposed to a manufacturing or other type of economy. And so we're seeing with our young people, I think about Zara in Chicago. If you think 10 years ago, everybody had a car, everybody. And today, the people that we're hiring, it might be 20 or 25% are choosing car ownership, but the rest are choosing, you know, public transportation and MaaS solutions. And we're seeing MaaS being the bigger driver versus public transport, because it's able to provide them a customizable solution for their kind of everyday mobility needs, whether that's within the city or even making longer journeys, something that wasn't possible even 5 years ago. And so that's very attractive to them from a cost savings perspective, from a convenience perspective. And we're seeing a really big shift in the US towards these types of options.
Yeah, and in the US, you know, the challenge of the distance is somehow different than in Europe. I mean, how do the other panelists say see that challenge of, you know, how MaaS can work well in the cities? How does it work when we go back at home at the weekend and have to take the kids to football, for example? Louis.
It's an excellent example you just chosen there, actually, Sophie. So I did a little personal experiment about 2 years ago, where actually we went down to just one car for my family, and during the week that car wasn't available to me. So that was really my first taste of piecing together, if you like, journeys to get me to clients, to get me to the office, and really experimenting on how I could do that. And from Monday to Friday, I actually found I was able to do that. I'm quite well connected where I live. I'm quite close to a train station. I'm quite close to an airport, so hiring a car if I needed one was possible to do. Where it started to fall down, though, was actually at the weekend, when one son needed to get to football, the other son needed to get to rugby, and there was no public transport options for either of those. And that was when actually we got back to needing, or felt we needed, a solution of 2 cars. So I think it's a really important, I guess, part of the puzzle that needs to be solved, is that ability to connect up different transport options, not just in and around cities, but actually as you head into the countryside, we're not particularly remote here, as I've just described, but it's not a city centre, and it's harder to piece those things together. So a key for MaaS, and a key to really making this work, is ensuring that somehow that access to different forms of transport is available, no matter how far from a city centre you are. And I think just the other part in that that's interesting, it comes back to a couple of other points we've mentioned, things like identity, that your identity can change during the course of the week. Monday to Friday, my identity was that of someone needing to get to and from work. My identity at the weekend was a father trying to get his children to different sports events, and therefore my needs changed. And MaaS has the potential to help solve those particular challenges as well. But yeah, it makes the puzzle even more intricate and complicated, I think.
I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to react to that challenge of making MaaS a reality at cities.
I just really quickly, we have a really good example about that. So we're based and headquartered here in Finland. And one of the things that you almost always certainly hear for MaaS, that when you're competing with private car ownership, is that, oh, but when I need to get to my summer cabin, because almost everybody has one in the countryside. So we actually thought that let's test it out. If there's a hypothesis that people need their cars because they have their summer cabins, let's make them a product that answers that particular need. And that's why we then developed Whim Weekend. So basically during the weeks, you have the basic things like unlimited access to public transport, you have shared bikes, shared scooters, etc. But you're also guaranteed a rental car for every single weekend. So this is how you evolve different things. And this is also one of the upsides of MaaS that lets us start basically testing out what are the different bottlenecks that people are having or they think they have. Let's just create something for it.
Interesting. So, and I'm picking up questions from the audience, by the way, that I'm seasoning through my questions, but what about inclusion? I'm getting some question about whether you observing any gender difference in how people are using and the frequency with which they're using MaaS, but also related to that, you know, what are the benefits of those mobility services have in supporting accessibility, in driving inclusion, or in potentially being divisive? In a way, we've touched on the risk of division between rural and urban, but I just wanted to open that for comments. And maybe, Verushka, it'd be interesting from your point of view, what you observed on that front.
It's true that at the moment, and because one of our vehicle is actually accessible, so you've got an access ramp for all of the vehicles. The 300TX, they have the access ramp, and this is something that we felt that it was very lacking as an offer. There was not enough of them, which means that, and from talking to some of our customers, they are very actually happy to be able to have an easy access to a vehicle. The problem that they have is that it's difficult for them to get to point A to point B to actually check, someone in a wheelchair, to actually check if they can take public transport, do they have lifts, do they have, like the bus, are the bus adapted, and all of that. So the fact that the MaaS can provide that by giving an option of saying, okay, this is what I have a wheelchair, how can I get that from point A to point B, rather than having to check each one of the different individual transport, is something for sure. So I know that all the cities at the moment are working on that to be able to provide an easy access to people on wheelchair, for example. But at the moment, that's not the case. So I think it's very important, like the MaaS takes that into consideration, because it is definitely people that are looking for a solution. And so yes, it is a potential solution for a lot of people that are at the moment in need of an answer.
Interesting. Any other comment on that point of gender differences or potential for greater inclusion through MaaS?
Well, I think that it's good to know that it takes a village. It's a difficult topic, but certainly not shying away from the responsibility that any of us have to improving inclusion. I think that some of the things that we're noticing is that, first of all, we seem to have a fairly balanced gender balance between our customers. We also have a surprisingly high number of elderly people using our service, even if it's fully app-based. So we're very, very glad about that. But then beyond this, there's still need, for example, of getting better accessibility data. It's not really available in many of the cities or many of the countries. It's very hard for us to provide somebody the guarantee that, for example, the bus or the metro is accessible by wheelchair, or for example, with a buggy if you're with a kid. So we need to improve the data that is available. And at the same time, it's very difficult for us, for example, to improve the accessibility of, for example, stations. And when you're trying to provide a multimodal service, obviously that sort of things, they are a crucial thing for many, surprisingly many people. And that's why I'm saying that even though we need to do our bit, but at the same time, it really takes a village to improve accessibility and inclusion to the level that it really should be.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the way you gather data, you have a unique opportunity to collect disaggregated data that will, fuel the design of the service. And I'll be curious as well to know, and we might not have enough time to go into that, but how there is a diversity of input in the design of those services, because this is an opportunity to design a service that can cater for differentiated needs. So this could be a room for improvement in that respect. Maybe I sort of, sorry,
just to add, that's where the partnership between the public and the private is key. It's definitely key. We need to work together to be able to find solutions for all type of customers, all type of people or users, and what they're looking for. Without that partnership, obviously, we will not be able to provide the service to all the different type of users.
Great, thank you. I wanted to shift gear a little bit and go up the supply chain and looking at sort of manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers. How do they see the rise of MaaS, and how is that impacting the way they work with potentially new partners? Jeremy, I'm just wondering, and then Gregory, I'd love to have your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think partnership is key here. OEMs are very, very good at making cars, something that's very difficult to do. But they may not be the best at developing software or designing a user experience that's totally new to them. So there's a lot of upstart companies, a lot of different partners out there that are available. And if they're able to find the right partner, they can create a synergistic relationship where they can provide a service to a customer that on their own individually they would never be able to do. I think of one example, a client, not an OEM, but they work in more traditional transportation models, bus service, taxi service, things like that. But they're very good at routing. They're very good at hiring and training drivers. They're very good at that. They've recently partnered with Waymo. Waymo is Google's autonomous driving solution that they're testing in a few cities in the United States. And Waymo's got this great technology, but they don't know how to route. They don't know how to hire and train drivers in an efficient manner. So between the two, they're able to create this synergistic relationship to provide to the end consumer this unique product, in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and hopefully more cities soon. So I think partnership is key. They can't do it alone, and so I think that's a way for them to build success for the future.
Interesting. So a new kind of symbiotic relationship with those technology partners. I mean, but do they see this as more as a threat or more of an opportunity?
I think it's definitely an opportunity. I mean, there's a lot of different, like we talked about, different modes of transportation. I think overall, it's an opportunity to create market share, to build on their brand, especially when it comes to perception on sustainability and things like that. For them to be successful, they need to show themselves as really entering this market in a strong way, and MaaS provides them an avenue to really shout it out how well they're doing and what they're doing to create a sustainable mobility service and solution for their customers.
Great. Gregory, coming to you on how MaaS is quite profoundly changing our understanding of the car. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, just to go through what Jeremy, in fact, it's an opportunity, but I think for the manufacturers and even the suppliers, there is no other choice to say that as an opportunity. In fact, they already say that everybody is doing that. So when you're doing your risk or opportunity, or you are risk and you are out of the market, or you want to be in the market and then you need to push. So, and to be a player, to be an actor, and to be positive on that. I think we have with Tata a good example of an O&M which is moving to a service company, but PSA is doing the same, BMW is doing the same, everybody is doing the same. So I think it's no more now a question of risk or opportunity. I think it's more a question of, yes, it is an opportunity, I need to take it. The question is now how I am in the market in regard that I am in advance or I am late. If I am late, what can I do? Because I think maybe there will be a kind of consolidation as it is the case generally with the new market, new business model. Someday there is a kind of consolidation and to see who are the winners. And so we are not yet that, but in few days, in few years, I think we will see that. I think it's very interesting, in fact, for such groups, because it's a question of value. In fact, what is the value I can provide, and to who? So I said already that finally my clients becomes users which has now an identity of way of using mobility, and not so much a client using a car. So okay, I will be a provider of that. And what is my value in this? We say a global chain. This is a question of skills. This is a question of processes. This is a question of market. This is a question of data. The data is a key point for them, because as industrial, their cars are now kind of device, and the device is providing and producing a lot of data. So the question is, how can I use such data to have valuable market data with such part? So I think it's a large range of new opportunities, but needing a clear view to be sure to invest in the good way, because you can invest in a lot of opportunities. At the end of the day, what is important always in the industrial part is to invest in the business for which you have a return of investment. And so here is I would say here is the risk, is to invest on something for which you will have a risk of return of investment which will be close to nil. So this is the risk.
So, and maybe that's also a question for you, Luis. Do you see already evidence of manufacturers' priorities, changing in the way they design cars, their functionality, or anything else to meet this growing demand? And maybe Gregory, Luis, feel free to respond.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely we're seeing it influencing the type of vehicles that the OEMs feel they need to put out to the market. If we pick up the point about the connectivity of a vehicle and a vehicle as a device, I know from my own personal experience, if I'm going to hire a car, I want a car that's got Apple CarPlay. So I can just plug my phone in and everything's there. And that will dictate the car that I choose. I'd be interested to see if Chris is actually seeing that in the way that people are using MaaS and choice of short-term use of a vehicle. I think similarly to that as well, if car ownership really does move towards very short periods, maybe even just a few hours at a time, then I would assume that really what the consumer wants is a vehicle that they can just very easily get into and drive, and it's not complicated, because this isn't going to be a vehicle that they own and get used to over a period of time. And driving can be dangerous, so it needs to be a vehicle they can quickly just sit in and be comfortable with. But then that leads you down a path of something that's very generic. So I think there's a challenge there for manufacturers, for the OEMs, to provide cars that are both very, very user-friendly, but also do have some sort of difference from their competitors, and therefore will be a reason to be chosen above the competitors. So I think there's a few things there that are very heavily influencing the OEMs, and I can see that there's a challenge there for them to try and meet sort of potentially a couple of conflicting or competing priorities.
Maybe I can add something regarding the Geely and Cao Cao, because that's an example actually of a car manufacturing going into the mobility. Cao Cao in China, they use the Geely cars. So you've got first of all, 97% of the cars are electric. Okay, so you see the way that they are going. But what's interesting is when they decided with other investors to start the service in Paris, they decided to use the TX. The TX is the black cab. That's the new version of the black cab. The black cab, they made about 2 years to actually develop it. What they did is that they looked at all the usage of a car, of a ride-hailing car, chauffeur service car, and they did provide everything in the service, everything that you can find. So that's why I was talking about the access ramp. You've got plugs in it. You've got 6 people, so that means that potentially you'll be able to share a ride on the car. Everything had been thought of. So that means that you've got a car which is built for mobility. It's not built for own usage. It's actually built for mobility. And you can see that other manufacturers are doing the same thing more and more. Like Renault just announced with Renault Evolution that they are launching a car built for mobility for the VTC market in France. So you can see that car manufacturers are trying to find that and not using the normal cars actually to provide that service, because it will be able to provide something else.
Interesting, and I'm getting lots of questions, Verushka, including what's a lesson Chacha will learn in China is currently applying in Europe. Maybe we'll have time for that later, but this so far has been a very much of a good news story. I'm just wondering, what do you see the key barriers to implementations to be? And attached to that, what do you think needs to happen? What are the key levers for those barriers to be dismantled and for MaaS to fulfill its promise? And I'm opening up, maybe I go to you, Krista, first, and then please the others, if you can think about your answer to that.
It's a slightly different thing of which continent you talk about. But essentially, the biggest barrier that we have at the moment is the walled garden approach. It's in the US, it's a little bit more on the private sector side. So we have the Silicon Valley guys taking the walled garden approach. Now, unfortunately, in Europe, it's really the more or less publicly owned monopolies. So it's very, very difficult to provide people a service that is reliable, and also gives them that convenience and gives them that flexibility, if you don't have access to such, and especially from a sustainability perspective, such key services like public transport. And certainly that's what we're seeing in Europe. It's really quite a pity. But then at the same time, we do also have many of the other places, for example, Switzerland and Belgium. Holland is also doing activities to this end that are showing that there's another way of doing it. But I think that whether it's public or private, the biggest barrier is the walled garden approach and basically having a very old mentality. We are now trying to provide a completely new customer market or consumer market. And I gotta say, even to the discussion of the OEMs, I'm happy to see them that there's so much activity and there's so much push to develop things. But a lot of the time, the operational model is the old school one. And that's unfortunately what I would say that is not supporting the actual development of mobility as a service. Neither is that taking us forward with the sustainability and other societal goals, and actually not giving people what they need as a proper alternative.
Any other perspectives?
Yeah, if I could come in, I think the appetite for governments to push an agenda that supports MaaS is absolutely pivotal to this, and it's what we've seen in some countries where governments, and ideally successive governments, because it has to be a long-term plan, if they have this as a priority and something they're willing to invest in, then it will push it forward. But if you don't have that consistent approach with successive governments willing to back this approach, then that's where it will fall down, or it won't progress to become actually, a real game-changing piece.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that push governments or mayors of cities is actually to make it nice for the inhabitants, for people that live in the cities. So they don't actually have a choice. It's either they make the city nice, and especially with the context that we are living at the moment, we can see, like you can say for Paris, and we've heard about it, actually people leaving Paris at the moment for a simple reason that they want to have a nicer place to live rather than staying in the city. So if they want to actually keep the people living in the cities, they actually need to provide service, and they need to provide a city that is nice to live in, and providing that service is part of it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that links to another question I received on the questions as well. How the COVID context has shifted mindset, and certainly is put in sharp focus that people will only stay in cities if the environment is pleasant, convenient, and all of the above. Any other comments, Jeremy, Gregory, on the barriers to implementation that you see and opportunities to breaking those?
I can speak from the U.S. perspective. One of the things that I think is a bit unique to us is the distances between urban areas. So, from Chicago, the nearest urban area is 90 miles away. And if you, depending on if you go west or south, it might be a 5-hour drive to the next city. And so when you're talking about these great distances, what we don't have right now, and it's a challenge, is the infrastructure from a MaaS perspective to get outside of kind of the near suburbs. And so, from a ownership versus MaaS perspective, people are reluctant to fully adopt MaaS because of the infrastructure not really being there to easily get, to that next town or that next city.
Gregory?
No, I fully agree, and indeed the infrastructure it's a kind of important things to develop. It could be a barrier, as you said, Jeremy, but not only in the US. I think it is the case. If you have an example, just before the webinar, my partner said to me, "Okay, I need to go to the clients, and so I'm with my bicycle, so I need to find a park for my bike." And he called 5 parks in Paris, and no one of them accept bikes. So conclusion, he went to the client in car, and so it's a really kind of barrier and concrete barrier because I have my bike, I want to go bicycle, I want to be sustainable, but I cannot because I do not know where to park my bike. Even in a COVID context, in which I think the car park in Paris are quite empty, I suppose, without any tourists and so on. So infrastructure, indeed, it's a real point to invest. It's a kind of it's a question of attractivity of town, and I think it will be more and more a kind of attractivity of town. It is a case, you said, in Germany, in the Netherlands. We can see that even in Finland, as you said, we have some attractive solutions. Probably in France, at least, and maybe in other countries. This is something which is a barrier to today, and something on which we need to move.
Thank you, Grégory.
One of the things that I would add regarding the context of COVID that has been added to the whole equation is safety. We didn't have that before, and safety is definitely one of the things that people are looking for nowadays. We can see it through our service because we have, a partition between the driver and the passengers, and that's something that definitely people were looking for, and more, and that's what people are using. They are walking. That's what we were saying earlier. They are walking. They are using bicycles, or they are actually using their individual cars or service that provide the safety. For example, is definitely a part of the equation nowadays, and it's going to last. This is one of the things that will last because obviously we are living through a pandemic, and we know because we have heard of it that it's not the first one, it's not the last one. Unfortunately, it's not the last one. So it is going to be a big part of something we need to take care of and take into consideration.
Yeah, no, and maybe to add on that, when we talk with OEMs and automotive suppliers, and we ask, how do you explain the increase of sales of cars by the end of 2020? Part of the explanation is that people want to buy a car to avoid to take the public transport. So it is a clear situation. So yes, COVID-19. It's an issue. We could change the way we see MaaS, because indeed, if it is not a coronavirus, but the first coronavirus, it will maybe change the way we want to use the services of mobility.
We've only just very few minutes left. I wanted you a last questions, and just in a few words, if you have to project yourself in the future, whether it's your desired headline or what would you read in the news in 5 years' time, let's say put a time horizon of 5 years around MaaS, and you can pick the angle that you want, whether it's about technology innovation, usage, sustainability, but if you could finish this session with your view of the future, what will we read in the news in 5 years' time around MaaS? And maybe I'll start with you, Krista, because you said that you were thinking and talking about it a lot. So I think it might be easier for you to think about it on your feet, and I give the others a bit more time.
Yeah. Yeah. So very self-centric. Basically, MaaS Global hits its 1 million cars replaced with WIM subscriptions 5 years early.
Excellent. Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Okay, yeah, I'll go. I'd love to see a headline that is how MaaS helped the world achieve zero carbon emissions.
Great. Next.
Louis, you just said exactly what I thought. I think that's what we would like to see, how we can help actually to reduce the carbon emission in the world and make it more climate, aware. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree, and maybe we will see someone who is saying, okay, I am the first guy to be able to go from Paris to Shanghai with an autonomous car without driving and sleeping all day long, and with zero emission. Indeed, it will be great. Yeah.
Thank you, Grégory. And Jeremy, no pressure. You have the last words.
Sure. I'll just add that I think in 5 years' time, we're going to see the headline focusing on how we've become less of car drivers and more of car passengers, and being able to use our transport time in a way that's productive for our lives and allowing us to free up other parts of our day to do the things that we enjoy.
Great. Well, that was great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution. I think we could have spoken about all this for a bit longer, but I think for anyone who wanted to understand the opportunities of MaaS, I think this was perfect. So thank you so much to all our speakers and to you participants, and for your questions throughout the session. Obviously, you can read more about the content that Mazars is producing on this topic on mazars.com and you'll see that there is a series of sessions that is in the works. So if you want to stay abreast of more opportunities to familiarize yourself with the topic of mobility, data and technology, stay tuned. So with this, I'd like to thank you all again for your participation, and till very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.